There is a strange moment when the day hasn't started yet, but the pressure already arrives. Thoughts rush in before anything actually happens. A quiet tug, pulling the mind off balance. It's easy to notice how the morning can turn into a response drill, a message, a notification, a memory of something unfinished. The mind bends toward whatever appears first, as if the whole day must orbit around it. The pattern feels familiar, almost automatic, leaving a faint sense of being moved instead of moving. A simple truth sits underneath. The first minutes often decide the tone, even when no one intends it. A small slip, yet it shapes the hours ahead. There is a different way to meet that early moment, and it doesn't require escape. It starts by placing the mind before the world touches it. A quiet reset, deliberate, unhurried, not a ritual for display, but a check on the inner levers before they run loose. The calm comes from choosing what gets to enter first. A single breath that reminds the mind it can set its own direction. Just that. A short pause, firm enough to change the angle of the day. Neuroscience points to the same edge the inner experience already reveals. The first thoughts carve the tracks every later thought tends to follow. A gentle nudge at the start can pull the brain towards steadiness, or scatter it before the day even unfolds. Patterns strengthen quickly in the morning, when the mind is still unguarded. This is why a few intentional moments matter more than they seem. Not as a trick, as a way to resist drifting into someone else's momentum. A quiet beginning, shaping quiet pathways. So the truth is simple. The first words you tell yourself in the morning expose what you're really preparing for, not what you claim to want, what you're actually ready to face. A quiet declaration sets the tone, not a fantasy, not a chant pretending the world is softer than it is, just a line that matches the weight of the day. When the mind stops hiding from reality, it steadies itself. It meets the world on equal ground instead of flinching. And in that moment, something shifts. A small, grounded honesty. Sharp. There's a kind of excitement that rises when the mind hears its own certainty. Not loud, not dramatic. A calm spark that sits behind the ribs. It doesn't rush you forward. It doesn't push you into some forced optimism. It just lets you feel capable again. Capable enough to breathe slower. Capable enough to stand still without collapsing inward. That quiet confidence stays longer than expected. Hold it. Just for a breath. Then comes the steadiness built day after day. The slow shaping of a place inside you that doesn't shake so easily. Call it ataraxia if you want, though the word matters less than the practice. It grows in small, consistent layers, each morning adding a thin coat of calm over the noise, each repetition settling the mind a little deeper into itself. It's not dramatic, it's not sudden, but one day you notice the difference. You aren't pulled apart as quickly. You aren't thrown off course by every passing trouble. You return to yourself faster, quietly. There is a quiet truth that sits beneath every reaction. Mood becomes fragile when it bends to whatever happens around it. A message left unanswered, a tone misunderstood, a plan disrupted. Each small thing pushes the mind off balance, and the day slips into a pattern that feels borrowed, not chosen. It is a draining state, a subtle form of emotional slavery, one that grows when left unseen. Pause here. There is a steadier path hidden inside the same moment. A shift so simple, it feels almost silent. Taking responsibility for the inner state, not as a burden, but as a steady reclaiming. A declaration that the mind is not an open field for every passing event to reshape. This is not defiance. It is clarity. A reminder that control begins with noticing what pulls the strings. then loosening their grip. Hold that thought. A single affirmation can start this movement from within. Not magic, just direction. The mind listens to what it hears often, even when spoken softly. It rewires itself towards strength when the message is consistent, when it's repeated without urgency, when it's allowed to sink in. Over time, the emotional center no longer chases stability outside. It builds its own, and the shift feels real. Quiet, but real. Pause here. There is a pattern worth noticing, a quiet habit that slips in without warning. The mind is left wide open, as if anything passing by deserves a seat inside. Noise enters, doubt enters. Small irritations drift in and settle like dust. And it happens so easily that it feels normal, too normal. The stillness inside becomes crowded before the day even begins. A simple truth rises here. Not everything deserves entry. It becomes clearer when watching how reactions form. They flare up quickly. They pull attention away from what actually matters. Yet the source is rarely the event itself. It is the response. The shift happens the moment the inner space stays guarded. The moment a pause is allowed to exist. A long breath. A small gap. Then the reaction softens. Control returns, quietly, with almost no effort once the habit forms. And in that control, there is a kind of strength that does not need to show itself. Just a steady center, unshaken. From that center, a boundary begins to draw itself. Not a wall, just a line. A reminder that inner calm is not something to be surrendered automatically. Peace of mind needs intention. It needs the willingness to choose what enters and what does not. Some thoughts are allowed to pass through without engagement. Some disruptions lose their power when met with silence. Sometimes the simplest act is to recognize that the inner space is yours to protect, yours to keep steady. A brief pause here. Hold it. There is a quiet cost hidden in the moments spent turning over things that refuse to bend. The mind keeps circling them, and the day feels heavier for it. A weight without shape. A pause forms here. Worry drifts into places where it has no influence. It burns through attention slowly, almost politely, until nothing steady is left. The body moves through tasks, yet the mind stays tangled in what cannot be touched or redirected. There is an exhaustion that comes from this spinning. A simple truth stands still. Life often rests on a split that feels subtle but defines everything. Some parts respond when effort is applied. Some remain unmoved no matter how tightly they are held. Recognizing that divide is not dramatic. It is quiet. It is grounding. It gives shape to the inner world with a calm precision. A moment of clarity settles. When attention returns to what can actually be steered, something shifts. Thoughts become cleaner. Actions feel less forced. The noise falls away just enough for direction to appear again. Progress no longer has to be loud or impressive. It only needs to be aligned with what is truly reachable. A still point emerges. It's uncomfortable to admit how easily the mind bends to the expectations around it. How quickly the sense of worth rises and falls with whatever gets done. And how quietly that pattern takes control. There is a moment when this realization stings. A moment when the pressure feels too familiar. Stop there, because the truth is simple. The world keeps rewarding output, not humanity. It teaches a rhythm that never lets you rest, a rhythm that whispers that doing more means being more. And yet, the heart knows something is off. There's a different kind of confidence that doesn't tremble with every success or failure. It feels quieter, more grounded. It doesn't ask for proof. It doesn't vanish when plans fall apart. It's the steady awareness that value isn't earned by performance. It's already there, even on slow days when motivation feels distant. Hold that thought. Then comes the harder part, disconnecting effort from identity. Letting work be work, not a measure of who you are. Letting results be results, not a verdict. It's strange how much relief comes from that separation. Breathing becomes easier. Noise loses its grip. Because once the self is no longer chained to the outcome stops ruling the inner world. And in that space, something steadier appears. Quiet, unshaken. Some commitments look firm on the surface, yet quietly fade the moment they meet real movement. It is strange how a clear intention can feel like progress when nothing has actually shifted. The mind enjoys that comfort. It paints a picture of change and calls it enough. Then a day passes, then another. And the gap between what is imagined and what is lived grows heavier. A quiet weight. A small reminder. Nothing moves until something is done. There is a different calm that comes from choosing motion over polishing plans. The kind of calm that does not need certainty to take a step. It does not chase the perfect sequence or the perfect timing. It simply honors the next thing that can be done. One action, then another. The rest can follow later. This rhythm has a grounding effect. It keeps the mind from drifting into the endless fog of preparation. It brings life back into the body, one decision at a time. Even a modest effort carries more truth than the most elegant blueprint. Simple, clear. There is also a quiet dignity in doing what feels right, even when it demands effort. It never shouts for recognition. It does not wait for ideal conditions. It moves because stillness would betray something inward. A small truth. A private standard. Knowing is rarely the problem. Most of the time, the challenge lies in closing the distance between knowing and doing. That space is where honesty lives. That space is where character forms. And in that space, action speaks in a way intention never will. There is a quiet shift that happens when an obstacle appears. The mind rushes to label it as a setback, as if something has gone wrong. Looking closer reveals a different pattern. The discomfort isn't a verdict. It is information. It exposes how quickly the mind assumes it is being punished. It shows how easily the narrative turns dark. Pause here. The moment that feels unfair might simply be a doorway, disguised as resistance. A challenge has a way of stripping away the noise. It shows the parts of yourself that are steady, and the parts that still shake. Pressure does that. It brings clarity. It makes you see what you lean on, what you avoid, and what you've outgrown. There is a certain honesty in that exposure. No decoration, no performance. Just the truth of your own footing. And in that truth, something inside starts to stretch. Quietly, consistently, almost imperceptibly at first. Until you notice you are not responding the way you once did. Hold that thought. Difficulty has its own form of training. Not loud, not dramatic. More like a slow chiseling of the inner edges. Every struggle demands a steadier breath, a clearer intention, a bit more patience with your own flaws. It's work that happens beneath the surface, work that others rarely see. But you feel it. You feel the burn of it on the days when everything feels heavy. You feel the refinement on the days when something clicks and you respond with more calm than expected. That's the training taking shape. Quiet proof, steady proof. Proof that the challenge was not just an interruption, but a tool shaping the person you are becoming. It's easy to blame the world for the way your thoughts twist, but the real trouble starts the moment your eyes slide towards someone else's path. A single comparison can drain the energy you fought so hard to build. It cuts quietly. It steals momentum before you notice. And then a strange heaviness settles in your chest. A pause, a small collapse. You know that feeling. The mind pulls away from your own rhythm and chases a life that isn't yours, and everything slows. There's a certain tension that rises when a screen starts showing you how well everyone else is doing. It looks harmless at first. Just a glance, just a scroll. But the feed never stops. It keeps feeding the part of you that already doubts itself. It pushes you toward a standard that wasn't made for you. And then the questions begin. Quiet, but sharp. What if I'm behind? What if I'm not enough? The truth is simpler. The image you compare yourself to was never the full story. Yet it can bend your mood in seconds, leaving you tired without knowing why. But there's a different kind of calm that returns when you remind yourself where you actually began. No one else carries your exact weight. No one else climbs from your exact ground. The roads look similar from far away, but up close, every path has its own shape, its own scars, its own pace. That recognition softens the pressure. It brings you back to your own steps. It makes the noise fade, even if only for a moment. And in that moment, something steadies. Because the only journey that can truly move you forward is the one beneath your feet. Motivation drifts in and out with no pattern. It rises on some mornings without warning, then fades just as quickly. There is a quiet truth in noticing how unstable it is. A flicker, a spark, nothing to lean on for long. And yet, the mind often waits for it, hoping it will return at the right moment. That hope can stretch into hours, then into days, then into a subtle frustration that feels heavier than it should. The weight comes from expecting volatility to act like something steady. It never will. That pause is enough. Discipline carries a different texture. It does not need to feel good to work. It does not need applause or momentum. It simply shows up, small and consistent, like a hand guiding you across the gap between wanting something and actually building it. There is a calmness in that, a sense of structure that doesn't chase emotion, but holds a line through it. When the mind wanders or doubts, discipline offers a place to return to. A simple, repeatable action, just that. And in that return, the gap between intention and result slowly softens. It narrows without drama, without spectacle. Quiet progress forms its own proof. There is also a slow strengthening that happens each time discipline is chosen over impulse. Not a dramatic transformation, more like a steady tightening of loose threads. Each repetition adds a slight firmness to the inner posture. Even on days when everything feels heavy, that posture remains. It becomes a kind of internal memory, reminding you that consistency is possible even in low moments. That strength is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It gathers quietly, like a muscle growing under the surface, waiting for the moments it will be needed. And it will be needed. Often, sometimes the mind drifts toward what is missing, almost by habit. It leans into scarcity, as if rehearsing old worries. But gratitude can soften that pull. It teaches the mind to slow down and notice what quietly supports it. Not the dramatic things, the ordinary ones. The ones taken for granted until a moment arrives when their absence becomes imaginable. That pause matters. It shifts the gaze from what feels incomplete to what already stands firm. A small shift, a real one. There is a kind of rewiring that happens when gratitude is practiced with intention. Thoughts stop rushing toward worst-case scenarios. The inner tone grows steadier. Optimism no longer feels forced. It grows from repeated recognition of what still works, even on difficult days. Resilience feels less like a performance and more like a quiet endurance that builds beneath the surface. A simple breath can reveal that difference. Stay with it. There is also the old habit of imagining loss, not to frighten the mind, but to remind it of the weight of what it holds. A cup of warmth, a familiar voice, a moment of calm that slips between obligations. Seeing how fragile these things can be makes their presence sharper, richer. It anchors the day. It shrinks the restless search for more. And for a brief moment, it becomes clear that nothing is too small to be noticed. Growth moves quietly. It rarely arrives with fanfare. It shows itself in the small shifts that build beneath the surface, almost unnoticed. A slight correction in how the mind responds. A softer breath before reacting. A steadier tone when the pressure rises. These small moves add up. They form a quiet momentum. And that momentum becomes something you can lean on. Something real. Even the smallest improvement carries weight. A single %, barely visible in the moment. Yet it gathers strength when repeated. Day after day. Choice after choice. It forms a rhythm that starts to change how life feels, how the mind settles, how the heart steadies. The change is subtle at first, then unmistakable. 1%. That's all. But it works. Every moment leaves something behind. A trace, a lesson, a texture you can work with. Even the dull parts of the day, even the ones that drain you. They still offer raw material. Not to romanticize hardship, only to acknowledge that nothing needs to be wasted. Not the slip, not the hesitation, not the small victory that no one sees. All of it can be refined. All of it can be used. Pause here. Let the idea land. Growth doesn't demand brilliance. It asks for willingness. A calm return to the path. A steady hand on the inner pace. And the quiet recognition that each moment can shape the next. It feels quiet to admit that a simple set of words can shape the way a life is carried. Not as instructions, more like a steady outline waiting to be lived into. A blueprint that doesn't shout, yet still redirects something inside. And in that outline, there's a sense of structure that calms the parts that often feel scattered. Just a pause, just enough to notice what holds firm. There's a softer truth beneath the idea of strength, not the loud kind. The kind that stays grounded when the day tilts. The kind that keeps a steady breath when something unexpected pulls at the edges. Wisdom and courage are quiet companions. They move slowly. They make room for the mind to settle before reacting. And in that settling, something resilient begins to form without fanfare. Consistency carries its own weight, not heavy, more like a pulse. A rhythm that steadies thought and action before they drift too far apart. Repeating small efforts until they feel natural. Repeating them even when the mood wavers. And somewhere in that repetition, intention deepens. Almost unnoticed. When all of this gathers together, it doesn't create a final answer. It just changes the way the inner world feels when the day begins and when it ends. A shift that's easy to miss unless you're quiet enough to sense it. A slow settling. A reminder that something inside is still taking shape.